All right, welcome. We're going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to use this PowerPoint instead of the book. Today we're going to be talking about the war between the states. And before I get going here, one thing I do want to point out, what people call the Confederate flag is not the Confederate flag. This thing right here, this is the Confederate flag. Okay? We're going to start with the first 7 states that joined the Confederacy, so that's where they get those. And of course, this is the Union flag. It doesn't look like our flag right now because they had less states than what we have today. We filled this whole thing up with stars. But this is how we start off with the Union versus the Confederacy, and I have a couple points that I'd like to bring about as the Confederacy begins. First, 4 out of 9 million people are slaves in what will be the Confederacy. So when we get to all the slaves that join the Confederacy, almost half the population are enslaved. The southern states depend on slavery for their economy. I mean, you can imagine with so many people out of your population are slaves, they are driving the economy right now. Without them, the Southerners, and I agree with this, believe that their economy will fail. They will not be able to sustain what they do down there. And then 7 states initially leave the Union: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Now, I'm going to be repeating myself a little bit here because I really want you to remember the states and the order because it's going to be very important for a point that I'm going to bring up. The next thing that happens is Lincoln calls for troops to fight the rebellion. 4 more states rise up because of this. They don't want to leave the Union at first. They're pretty close to leaving the Union, and then when Lincoln calls for troops to invade the South, that's enough for these other states to decide to join the Confederacy, and that's Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee, and then 4 slave states stay with the Union. That they decide to stay, and that's Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. Okay, and then once the Confederacy gets going, Jefferson Davis becomes the president of the Confederacy, and that's this guy right here. Okay, next we need to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, and it is instituted January 1st, 1863. Now, the first state that secedes is in December 1860, and the fighting begins in 1861. So you notice here, this is almost about a year and a half after the war starts that we finally get the Emancipation Proclamation. So this is the middle of the war that this happens, obviously, and it only frees the slaves that are in the Confederacy. It doesn't free the slaves in the border states of Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, and Kentucky. It only frees the slaves in the states that are in rebellion. And this changes the face of the war. So that before it was just about union, about bringing these states back into the union. And once the Emancipation Proclamation um, is uh, proclaimed, then it's about slavery. Okay, and the underlying reason really was slavery, as I'll show here in just a minute. Just to reiterate here, emancipation, if you remember, in the last chapter, we talked about emancipation as freeing of slaves, and proclamation is to proclaim something. So I can proclaim history is the best subject in the world. That's a proclamation that I'm saying it out loud. So right now, the president is proclaiming that these slaves are now free. Okay, so let's take a look at the secession map. And you can see here we have the states. The first states that join are these red states down here: Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. And then the 4 states that join up after Lincoln calls for troops: North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Now, if we go in order, I want you to start seeing, because on this map you can see the percentage of slaves in each state. So the first one is here in South Carolina. The second one is Mississippi. Third one is Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Okay, that all happens within 2 months of each other, from December 1860 to February 1st of 1861. And then a couple months passes, and then Lincoln calls up troops, and then you got Virginia joins on April 17th. Then you have Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And that is the Confederacy. Those 11 states. Starts with 7, and then 4 more join to have 11. These yellow states are border states. Okay, we have Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware. You can see that 10%, 20%, 13, and 2% of their population is slave. And then we got this old guy right here. West Virginia forms in 1863, breaks off from Virginia and joins the Union. So they secede from Virginia and become their own state. And that's how we get West Virginia, folks. I bet a lot of people did not even know that probably live in West Virginia, and we still don't know our own history. But that's how West Virginia comes to be. It's because of the Civil War. They wanted to be a part of the Union and get away from Virginia, and this is what happens here. So the border states are Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. West Virginia breaks off from Virginia, and then the Confederate states are everybody down here. Okay? So it's important. It's easier, I think, to remember the border states, the 4 border states, and then the 11 Confederate states. And if you ever tested on it, if you just remember those states, then you don't have to memorize all of the northern states, all the Union states, because there's a lot more of them. Okay? All right, so I want to make a point about the order of succession and the percent of slaves in each state. So these are the original states. You got South Carolina with 57, Mississippi 55, Florida 44, Alabama 45, Georgia 44, Louisiana 47, and Texas 30. You could see there's a trend here. Okay, and then after Lincoln calls for troops, we got Virginia at 39, Arkansas 26, 33, and 25. And the 4 border states, the ones that stay with the Union, Missouri with 10%, Kentucky with 20, Maryland 13, and Delaware 2. So you could see a trend here that the higher percentage states are the ones that leave earlier. The ones with the middle leave the Union later, and the ones with the lowest don't leave at all. So there is a correlation here between how much, and you can see it right here on this graph here, starting with South Carolina. This is the first state that leaves, and then these 4 states never leave. And you can see there is a clear trend from when states are leaving the Union or at all, and how many slaves are in their population. Okay, so if anybody's wondering, hey, this war had nothing to do with slavery, you can't say that. You can make an argument that slavery wasn't the only thing. There were other factors, and we already discussed them in this chapter. But to say that slavery had nothing to do with it, I mean, you can clearly see a motivation here. Okay, all right, so that's it. Thanks for joining us, and have a great day.